good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Mainstream. Gary Allen with you on this Friday afternoon at a little bit after 4 p.m. We're going to run a little bit longer, over 5 o'clock. We got a great show for you today, but before we get to our guest, Alan Chapell, let me tell you, finally, we've got Adrian Paul, who played the Highlander on TV. He's booked for April 9th, so circle your calendar. Adrian Paul will be joining us. I also think that we might have Bruce. We might have Bruce Flange coming on as well. Loretta Swit cannot make it. A project she's on is running longer, so she's not going to be able to come in April and join us. But we got Bruce Flange possibly coming on, and then I've got to call out to a couple other people. We have some other stuff. Hey, out there, I didn't catch who it was right away. Quickly. Oh, Mr. Gaz, how are you, sir? God bless. Joins us every day. I thank you. Please tell your friends that we're on at 4 p.m. every Friday afternoon with Main Street. And we've got a great guest for you this afternoon, a gentleman who's a singer, songwriter, also a lawyer, which is kind of unusual. He's worked in Bombay. He has some of the best music out there. We're going to play one of his songs a little bit later called On the Rooftop. And I think you're going to really enjoy it. For those of you that are watching the program early with Mark, Rick, and Donna, and with all my friends out there and from overseas, thank you so very much. I hope you stay with us. I hope you enjoy the show, Main Street. So let me get to it right now. Like I said, this gentleman is a singer, songwriter. He's a band leader. He's also a lawyer, and he writes music that is of the soul. It incorporates jazz. It incorporates Latin flavor. It incorporates on the rooftop type of stuff, you know, the midnight, that hazy fog, and you hear the horn playing in the background, you know, that kind of stuff. It's kind of a interesting notes that he puts into everything. He's a fabulous musician. I'm so glad that I got a chance to meet him and also to have him on the program. Would you please welcome Mr. Alan Chapell?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Gary.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to have you. He's out in his palatial palace in California. He's a bi-coastal musician. And before we even get into your music, what is that like? You live in California part of the year. You live in New York part of the year. What is that like, and what does that bring to your music?
Well, yeah, I spend a lot of time in New York's West Village and also in Sausalito. And, you know, there's a lot of similarities in the two communities. There's sort of this, you know, last vestige of hippiedom that still exists in both of them, but probably more so in Sausalito. And boy, I just love living in both places. They're both great places to just soak up the scenery, soak up the emotion of what's going around me. And it's just a great place to write.
Yeah. And you obviously get two different worlds colliding together. I mean, New York City is vastly different than Sausalito. If I remember Sausalito at all, and the West Coast, you get that vibe from the West Coast, which is entirely different. It's like listening to Dave Koz or David Sanborn to me.
Yeah.
When it comes to jazz. There's a collision in there somewhere, and it's great music. When you were growing up, when did music become something that you wanted to do? You said, this is where I want to go, or were you like a lot of us in getting into the business because that's where the prettiest girls hang out?
Well, it's funny you say that. So my first concert, I think I was 4, and I played a talent show in the basement of the Ferguson Library in Stamford, Connecticut. I sang Nowhere Man by the Beatles. And I got to tell you, I killed it that day, because if you're 4, as long as you sort of get through the song and remember most of the words, you've done pretty well. And I remember getting off the stage, and suddenly I'm surrounded by second grade women.
You chick magnet, you.
I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is the life for me.
Yep. Yeah. My good friend Ray Abruzzo, who you know from The Sopranos, who was on this program the first week that we had it, and he and I both share a lot of similarities. And yes, the very first time that he went on stage or did anything, or it was in high school, and he looked into the class where it was drama, and there were all these girls in there, and he goes, I'm going there. You guys can go to wood shop for all I care. And the same thing happened to me. I went in junior high school. I'm going to go do the Christmas play because the prettiest girls are going to be in this play. And I ended up playing one of the 3 wise men. But yeah, now I never got to date any of those girls. I mean, you look at this face, you know why. But I never got to date any of them, but that's where I wanted to be. And although where I live now, forget it. So you grew up in Connecticut, which I know very well because my dad is from Hartford, Connecticut, and my family still lives up that way. My sister and other family members, and a brother who lives in Boston. What flavor? Where did Where do they meet? Where does the East Coast and the West Coast meet when you put together your music? When you're sitting down and you're writing, whether it be the melody or the words or whatever, where do they meet?
Well, a lot of times it really depends on where I am. I find that there are certain songs that are more New York City songs. On the Rooftop, which you're going to play, is very much a New York City song. Ride off of Penultimate, which was a single that has been pretty successful. We've gotten a few million streams so far. But that's definitely a West Coast song. And so I love that I'm able to kind of mix both. And you see that, you know, that you can almost tell where the song was written by just the vibe in the song.
Yeah, I mean, I love the song. Like I said, we're gonna play this later on, you know, because and that's what I love about your music. And we're gonna get back to when you were 15 years old, who you met, because it was kind of a mutual. Your agent and this gentleman, they're all you guys are all represented by Frank, not by Frank, but by Ken. Where do the layers come from? I mean, your band is not just a bass player, rhythm guitar, a lead guitar, organ player, and a drummer. You incorporate a lot of different things, like many of the groups that I've admired over the years, like Chicago, Moody Blues, Pink Floyd. You just don't go with the 4 or 5 players and okay, let's down at you know, and the Beatles with what they did. Where are the layers coming from? I mean, what was it that you said, I can't be like everybody else? This is what did you learn that when you went to Bombay?
Well, a little bit. Yeah. I mean, so when I went to Bombay, I played with a band that did sort of an East-West fusion thing. Think Paul Simon Graceland, except for with Indian instruments rather than African. Okay. But what I learned there is that you know, you need to, you know, kind of respect the culture that you're in. And so I incorporated a whole bunch of Indian classical instruments and tried to bring it into kind of an 80s new wave modern rock vibe. Now, I grew up playing trumpet. I played trumpet until, you know, from when I was 4 until I was about 18. And so for a while I would have a trumpet player in the band because it just seemed like that was the thing that spoke to me. I also kind of have a background in 80s synth type things. And no, I do have a piano player, but I also have a violinist who sort of takes that sort of 80s synth type of a feel. She's absolutely fantastic. Her name is Lorenza Ponce, and she plays with a whole bunch of huge bands like Bon Jovi and Sheryl Crow. And but for me, what Lorenza really brings to the table is that she takes this kind of synth mindset and brings it into this gorgeous, you know, classical violin style.
I think there's something
that styles is what it's all about, man.
Yeah, I think what the violin brings in, along with the keyboard, because you're a keyboard guy now, you play the piano, which is cool because versatility is what really makes it in this business. But you know, again, your layers that you put into your music, I think people appreciate that more than just coming up in front of a microphone and singing. I think people nowadays with music, and this has been going on for 40, 50 years, if not longer, you know, they gravitate towards that kind of thing. I mean, I love classical music, and that's layered.
Yeah.
That's really layered. So, I mean, which brings me to this. Do you think that all right, who were the people that you admired? Who were the people that you, growing up, you went, okay, I'm taking a little bit from here, I'm taking a little bit from here, a little bit from here, kind of mold it around, play with it, and make it my own? Who were those people that you listened to growing up that you kind of took a little bit from each one of them?
Yeah, so I loved Brian Ferry. I loved the Talking Heads, the Police, the Smiths. The Cure was a really interesting one for me because he's the one that really brought in the use of horns and strings. Robert Smith and the Cure. I'm a huge fan and a huge influence on what I'm doing. But I love your use of the word layers because I really do kind of try to incorporate that into the mix. What I love about the music that I love is you can hear somebody just playing an acoustic guitar and singing it, and it works on that level. And then you can hear it with, throw in a violin and a piano, and it works on that level and it brings something different. Or you do it with classical Indian instruments and it works on that level. And for me, that's the more interesting thing about music, is you can kind of bring that different perspective in there.
Well, that's what I think people really appreciate about music, when you hear it and you love it and you deal with it. Now, I want to go back to when you were 15 years old, because we talked about it before the show. You had met someone who Frankie Pavetta works with a great deal.
Yeah.
And of course, Ken is your agent as well as Frankie's. Talk about that experience at 15 years old.
Well, I was fortunate to meet up with a guy named Jimmy Einer. And really, the Einer name is sort of a name of royalty in the music business over the last 30 or 40 years. Mm-hmm. Jimmy had just produced, or was about to produce, what became the Dirty Dancing movie and soundtrack.
Yeah.
He had produced a whole bunch of bands over the years, the Bay City Rollers, Kiss. I think he was involved in Van Halen in some level. He had just done everything. And at 15, Jimmy Einer, who had produced all these great people, had agreed to produce an EP that I was working on.
Right.
And boy, I'll tell you, sometimes youth is wasted on the young a little bit. I don't think I knew how good I had it at that time.
Yeah. I just want to send a message out to Tom Bannis. Tom, if you want to bring someone on, please do, by all means. I just wanted to send that out there. Frankie is going to be coming on here, but how was that? You saw those gold records. You saw all those gold albums on the wall. What did that do to you? How did that?
It's funny. Yeah. So I remember downstairs in Jimmy Einer's basement, which is where he had an office and a little bit of a rehearsal studio. Mm-hmm. And one of the gold records that jumped out at me was this band called Frankie and the Knockouts. And I remember thinking to myself, I see that gold record, and that's who I want to be.
Yeah.
I want to be that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody in their own right wants to be the fantastic musician or person who's making the music and everything. But where did you go from 15? Now you're older, and where did all that take you at that point? You're 15 years old. You're impressed by the gold records. You're seeing all this, and you see Frankie's stuff and all that. But what did you do between then and there?
Well, I went off to college and joined a band there, and we were playing in front of 3,000 to 5,000 people in the Northeast regularly in the late 80s and early 90s, and we had we counted Chris and Tina from the Talking Heads among our fans, and we sold I don't know how many tens of thousands of records.
And you know the guys from the Talking Heads.
I do. Yeah, I've known them. Been good friends for years. Chris and Tina I've known for a long time, and have become pretty friendly with Jerry Harrison. He produced my album called The Redheads Allegations several years ago, and really that's what brought me out to Sausalito. I came out there and rented a houseboat because it was right across the street from Jerry's studio in Sausalito, and I just discovered that community and realized that it's a long story, but I had to live there. It was just such a wonderful community.
Yeah, it is. When I lived out there, it was very nice. Now I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit because Kurt Cobain, well, I don't think you ever met him that I'm aware of, was somewhat responsible for you leaving the States and going to Bombay, India. Now, my question is, beyond the Kurt Cobain influence of you moving out, and you'll tell us why Bombay, India?
Well, so I was a 80s synth keyboard player, well into the early 90s. And what happened with when Nirvana released Nevermind, suddenly that's all anybody wanted to do was play loud guitar. And as a piano player and keyboardist, all the work in New York City dried up, and really dried up for several years. And so, I tried to keep going, but it seemed like the writing was on the wall. And I met a band through the Village Voice, a band called Kalki. who their guitarist was at the time living in Jackson Heights, Queens, but he was heading back to Bombay because they had a record deal with BMG, and they had been invited on the Peter Gabriel World of Music and Dance Tour. And so to me, it seemed like a really interesting opportunity to take what I was doing and bring it into a whole new thing. And so I lived in Bombay for a while, and we wrote a bunch of songs and recorded some of them. And at the end of the day, it didn't entirely work out, but the thing that really mattered to me was when I left Bombay, I moved back to Connecticut, and I was back with sort of the same group of friends and just sitting on the couch and drinking beer. And I thought to myself that, you know what, this isn't going to be my life. I need to find something. And literally with not a dime in my pocket, I moved to New York City and started playing in bands there. And long story short, here I am.
Where did you becoming a lawyer get into this?
Well, somewhere along the mix, I started working at these internet companies. They called it at the time new media. And I saw that there was sort of a really interesting thing happening, not just with music, but with culture. And while I was working at these new media companies and playing music on the side, I went to college and studied human rights law at Fordham University. And when I got out, I ended up continuing to work at new media companies and continuing to pursue the music. And, little by little, I built up a group of clients who were these big tech companies who needed advice on what to do with consumer data. So I became this privacy officer to a whole bunch of tech companies.
What is a privacy officer?
Privacy officer advises a company on what they can and can't do with data. So you give your data to a company, your email address.
Right.
What can that company do with that email address? Can they sell it to somebody else? Can they use it to tie it to your phone? Can they tie it to your personal address? Those kinds of things.
You like everybody else, we're all going through this COVID-19 situation, and nobody's really performing anywhere. I would imagine around the world. How has the COVID dealt with you as far as your writing is concerned? Performing, I'm sure, is down to zero like it is for everybody else, unless you're doing it online. So how have you been able to deal with this COVID being restricted in your home and not being able to get out and about up until recently, possibly?
Well, one of the cool things about Sausalito is it's the only place in the world that I know of that has regular live music. So I played a couple of shows where what they do is in the houseboat community of Sausalito, they build a stage either on a raft or on somebody's houseboat, and then people will come up in kayaks and listen to the music. And so you literally have this dilapidated shack that is solar powered that you can play a solo show, or sometimes people play with the whole band.
Right.
You'll have 100, 150 kayaks and rowboats and sailboats come up, and you're all socially distanced because you're all in a boat, but you'll have a huge crowd listening to music. And so I've been able to experience that as a player and as a fan, and it's one of the cool things about Sausalito. But on top of that, over the last few months, I've been rehearsing with my band, where we do it all via Zoom. Uh-huh. And my band is located in Brooklyn, and they'll get together in a recording studio in Brooklyn, and I'll do it remotely, and I'll send my vocals in advance. And we've done about 25 songs together. We're going to release not one but 2 albums that we're going to start recording probably in April or May time. That'll be out later this year. So the good news for us is, there's been a whole bunch of bad news when it comes to COVID and music over the last year. And my heart goes out to folks, who are really suffering right now. But one of the bright spots, at least for me personally, has been I've been able to continue the musical side almost nonstop.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been tragic. I mean, I know comics that are doing parking lot shows and stuff like that to keep themselves going forward. So I would imagine it feels Does it feel claustrophobic to you? Have you been feeling that at all during this time?
A bit. One of the reasons that we moved from New York City to Sausalito was just there's so much more outdoors here. And I love New York, and New York is my home. And we'll be back there pretty soon. But with a 1-year-old, I've got a 1-year-old baby. She needs to run around a little bit. And so
Yes.
we're fortunate in that we can provide that for her. And boy, Marin County is pretty nice.
Yeah, when I lived out there, it was always great for families. There's large parks. When I lived in Las Vegas, the same thing. There was places, they always made room for parks and stuff for families. And here on the East Coast, they don't, at least in Florida, they didn't. They might be doing it now. But the last time I was down in Fort Lauderdale, where I'm from, every park that I used to know is now a condominium association, buildings and stuff like that. You have a wonderful and rich relationship with a lot of producers and musicians along the way. Talk about some of those, like we said, the Talking Heads. Jerry Harrison has been an influence for you. He's produced a couple of your albums. Talk about those relationships and what they mean to you and what you learned from them. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Main Street. My guest is Alan Chapell. You can catch him on his website at this is alanchapell.com at CHAPELL. Gary Allen with you. We're on at 4:00 every Friday afternoon. Please tell your friends. We certainly appreciate your viewing, and say hello. You can kind of chime in and say hello. And Tom, if you're listening out there, if there's someone you want to join us, by all means, I don't have a problem with it. I don't think Alan does either. But Alan, getting back to what I was asking, talk about some of those wonderful relationships with you and what they have meant to you in your creative life and in your career in general.
Yeah, I've been fortunate that I've been able to work with some fantastic and talented people. And, I think Jerry Harrison has to go to the front of anybody's list. I met Jerry through Chris Franz, his Talking Head bandmate, about, 9 or 10 years ago now. And I was looking for somebody to produce an album. And Jerry dug what I was trying to do. And he brought his special thing to it. And he brought in a guy named E.T. Thorngren, who's a fantastic recording engineer. But it's interesting. What Jerry brought to the table for me musically is in some ways less important than what I've learned about. I learned about life from him. Just a super smart guy, and he's one of those few people that I think has really been able to navigate both the music world and the business world. I mean, Jerry is obviously his credentials from the Modern Lovers to the Talking Heads to Live and all the bands he's produced over the years, that speaks for itself. But he's also worked with a whole bunch of companies. Now, Jerry and I are working closely with the company that it's called Ophirix, and they've actually discovered a universal cure to snake venom bites.
Really?
So, had I not met Jerry Harrison, I would not be involved in this thing. And literally, millions and millions of people die every year because of these. And this company has been able to figure out something that can help be an easy, affordable cure. So I don't want to get on my soapbox too much, but I would just say that what Jerry means to me is that he has enriched my life in many, many ways, and I feel grateful to have been working with him. The one thing that I've learned musically, and I've learned a bunch of them, but one thing that sort of jumps out at me is in my songwriting, Jerry has encouraged me to channel my inner smartass a little bit more. And because if you think about, David Byrne and Jonathan Richman are two of the people that Jerry, probably best known for having worked with. And those guys are absolutely brilliant, but they've got a tiny bit of smartass in them. And what he sort of encouraged me to do is not be afraid of that. To really to be open to the idea that, think different, bring some quirks into what you're doing. For me, that's been really, really helpful advice.
I think that musicians, actors, comedians, sports athletes, I think you have to have a certain degree of smartass. I really do. I mean, let's be honest. How many people in your life have said to you what they've said to all of us? Go get a job. I mean, learn to be something, don't show business and stuff like that. What are you kidding me? I remember I remember a girl in high school wouldn't give me the time of day. She was the head cheerleader. I mean, wouldn't talk to me if I had $1 million rolling out of my pocket. She wouldn't talk to me. Fast forward, LA, I'm doing Hill Street Blues, St. Elsewhere. Now, it's nothing big. You know, when I say 5 and under, I go home to visit my mom and dad. I walk into a restaurant with them, and guess who's the hostess? Guess who comes over to me? Now, I'm married at the time. I'm married to my wife, Grace. Yeah. Hands me a note. Would love to see you while you're in town. Now, you know, so all these people that are naysayers that later on are patting you on the back, I mean, what do you do about those? I mean, you know, I'm sure you've had it, but you've got to have a certain degree of smart ass because you've got people like that are like, you know, phonies.
Yeah. Well, also, you know, and
you got to go and you got, excuse me, and you got to go for it. What Jerry told you was 100%. I think if you're going to go for it, you're going to go for it. You give it everything you got as things move on. As the Beatles kept emerging along, each album was better than the other one. And each album you're doing is better than the previous one. And I think you got to go for everything you got because you got to give people something new. And I think a bit of smart ass is a good thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you know, you've been through this, like, you know, as a musician or as a performer, when you're playing to an empty room or a hospital room, you know, all you got is you.
Yes.
And, you know, and so, you know, sometimes you just have to, you know, just kind of have to roll with it.
When I started out as a comedian, I would start out with a full room, and by the time I was done, it was empty. I'm telling you, Tom, if you can, I would like the people to hear Alan's song On the Rooftop. And before you play it, though, explain a little bit about this, where the title comes from and the vibe from the music.
Yeah. So, you know, it's sort of an homage. Every group in New York City has a certain reverence of the previous group or two. So, you know, I remember coming up and thinking, man, the CBGB's days when you had the Police and the Talking Heads coming through there, that was the golden era. And then now I hear musicians talking about, you know, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and what was going on there in 2004, you know, how that was the golden age. And so the beauty is in New York City is you get to have a golden age every couple of years. And so what I was trying to do is reference some bands from the early 70s and late 60s in the song. Right. But at the end of the day, there ain't no party like a rooftop party in NYC. Yeah. That's really what it's about.
Yeah, exactly. Tom, if you got that ready to rock and roll, we'd love to hear On the Rooftop.
I'm going to be bringing on in just 2 minutes. I'm getting the video because the soundbite wouldn't cut through on Twitch. But I got you. Give me 2 minutes. All set.
Okay. All right. Well, we got to wait 2 minutes, but that's all right. Yeah. And for those of you that are not familiar, I think in LA you can't do it so much, but in Chicago you can, because there's a lot of places where you can perform on the rooftop. And you get that kind of vibe, that midnight vibe. Like I said, when we were talking before we went on the air, you know, you get that Miles Davis, that Chet Baker thing, which a lot of people are familiar with, that genre of the smoky kind of 3 o'clock in the morning, and you hear this horn off in the distance, muffled, you know, and I think that's what I think of when I think of rooftop performing. And I think it's what you bring to the show. And I really liked it a lot. I like your stuff a lot. You know, and I didn't know too much about you till a little while ago when your manager Ken said, "Hey, get this guy on." And so that's you know, that's where we're going. Before the song comes on, what is your style of writing? What hits you? Is it the melody first? Is it the words first? Is it something you hear, see? I mean, is it all of that comes into it when you're writing?
Yeah, I usually come up with a melody or at least a hook that's kind of dancing around in my brain, and I'll end up singing it into my phone. Or if I have a piano nearby, I will kind of play it a little bit and try to get some chords. But almost always the music is mostly written, and then words will come out or a phrase will come out, and then I kind of build from there. But usually I'll have most of the music written, and then I'll walk around Sausalito or the West Village and just try to find lyrics, and you find lyrics in the energy coming from from the neighborhood or from people's faces or from looking out on the water, and that's where that stuff usually comes from.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about getting ideas for things, I often just get out amongst the people and like you do and watch and saying, now when I was doing stand-up comedy, yeah, I was an observer of people. I still am. I'm still fascinated by people. Excuse me. I'm still fascinated by people, what they do and what they say. And without getting involved in politics, it's been an interesting 4 years for those of us that have been observing, and it's far from over with. When you're talking to young musicians out there that are just getting started, what's some of the advice that you give them as far as their background before they get into music? Do you find a lot of young musicians don't really understand the history of music, or maybe they do? Now, my history of music goes back a little further than yours because I'm a much older gentleman, but jazz and classical music always played an important role, and blues in the bands that I admired, like the Beatles. The Rolling Stones loved Muddy Waters, and they would go to Chicago and listen to him play. What do you tell those folks?
Well, look, I think the first thing you tell them is don't listen to anybody. Do your own thing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting when you say history of music, because I've seen it work really well both ways. There are guys out there who Elvis Costello is an absolute student of music. He gets, he is encyclopedic in terms of his knowledge of the history of music, and you can sense that in what he's creating, and it works for him. But there's also guys who say, you know what? I know there's stuff going on out there, but I don't want that to influence. I'm going to go my own route. And that's valid too, because sometimes you get weighed down by thinking about what's in the past. And I struggle with that just in terms of my own writing at times, because there's always this, well, because we did it that way, like I love when a musician tells me like, well, no, a guitar is not supposed to do that. And I say, well, what do you mean a guitar is not supposed to do that? A guitar is supposed to do what sounds good.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with what sounded good a year ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, if that was the case, then, Al Di Meola and Jimmy Page and others wouldn't be doing what they're doing. We're ready to go now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fabulous song. We're going to catch about a minute and a half of it. It's called On the Rooftop by my guest, Alan Chapell.
Came out in 1970. We started a revolution out of downtown NYC. We would dance with the Ghost and John Lennon down on Greenwich Street. We climbed up to the rooftops so we could move our feet. 'Cause it's just that way in the city. The holy modal around us were the spark to light the flame. New York stars and television took it to another plane. Yeah, we started our nights at CBGB's and the YMCA. Ain't nothing like an empty rooftop to dance the night away. It's just that way in the city. On the rooftop in the city, making music in the city, drinking moonshine in the city. Gotta feel good in the city.
Yeah. Oh, just as it was getting the grooving, man. And you can feel the layers, as I keep saying, as the song was going on, it's getting layered and layered and layered and layered and layered, and it's all coming together in an interesting, I don't know the words. I don't even have the words for it. It's so interesting the way it comes in, and I can see the rooftops. I can see the water, the water what do you call them on top of the rooftops in New York? The water.
Oh, the water tanks. Yeah.
Yeah, the water tanks, which you don't find in too many cities anymore. I'm sure they're probably taking them down in New York too. Where did on the rooftop? I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier. For those of you that are just joining us, this is Main Street. My guest is Alan Chapell. You can catch him on his website at thisischappell.com, CHAPELL. I'm Gary Allen with you, as we are every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. Hope you're having a great time. Please tell your friends all about us. When you're writing something like On the Rooftop, as you're hearing it and you're writing it and you're putting it down and everything, do you have to necessarily hear it per se, or do you just know that this is going to fit here? Or as when you go into the studio, what changes are sometimes made on the last minute?
Yeah, so I think the thing to keep in mind, or at least for me anyway, a song is never really finally written. So I'll put together a demo and I'll give that to my band, and they'll do it, and they'll work on some things and tweak some parts. And meanwhile, I'm still kind of feverishly redoing the lyrics. And then, you know what I had the In the City part was going to be just me singing it. And then I realized it needed a little bit more soul. So we brought in Curtis King and Cindy Mizell, who have probably been with just about everybody, but right now are probably best known for being part of the E Street Band with Bruce. You know, you continue to tweak and perfect it, hopefully, really until the thing is finally recorded.
Yeah, I mean, but here's something interesting that I've heard other musicians say. Even after it's been recorded and it's out there, and they go, ooh, you know, I think this would, if I go back in and rewrite it, or if I go back and do this again and change this and change that. Do you find yourself doing that the way writers do with books and stuff like that?
Yeah, sometimes. There's a song called I'm Coming Over, which was off of my third album, that I just didn't think in hindsight that we had gotten quite right. And so that's going to be a single from an album called Two Fishes, which will be out in a month or two.
I was going to ask you about that. Talk about that.
Yeah. So Two Fishes is something we recorded it just about a year ago. We did it at a place called the Power Station, New England, up in kind of upstate Connecticut, which is just a wonderful, wonderful studio to be working at. And the song features a cover of a song from a band that I didn't mention, but I should have, a band, The Cars. We're doing the song Drive. And I think that we pay respect to it, but kind of make it our own thing. And I'm really, really excited about that song and really the whole album, Two Fishes. I think that's going to be our biggest one yet.
Well, when you derive an idea for something, how quickly do you get to it? Or are you like, now I only use this because it's the only thing I can. Comedians sometimes will hear the front end of a joke, and it may take them months before they get to the back end of it and before they even put it out on stage. How is that with your music? Do you start a song sometimes and you get a block, you go away, and then you come back, you're working on other projects, and then you come back, or you go, oh, wait, that would fit over here?
Well, I would say that more often than not, I can get at least the demo out, so it's ready for, you know, sending to my band. I often can do that in under a week. But there are definitely songs. There's a song that I'm working on now called America that I've been working on for about 2.5 years, and it just didn't quite work. And sometimes it didn't work because I didn't feel it. And sometimes you wake up in the morning and suddenly the stars align in the right way or whatever it is, but suddenly it feels right. And so there's definitely that too. There's definitely songs that you know might take a while, but more often than not, what I found, and some of this is just that I write a lot. Mm-hmm. And so what I found is that you know, if it hasn't worked in a month,
right,
it's usually a sign to sort of let it go. And not to say that I'll never come back to it, but I found that if you spend too much time on a song to try to and it just isn't working, it becomes sort of a quagmire, and your time is better spent right, finding the new fresh idea.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I'm sure other people will come on and tell you the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. It's sort of like you're putting pressure on yourself to finish this, and that's not what is needed. So you need to maybe get away, go away, take a drive in the car, or take a couple of months and come back to it. And maybe by then your thinking and your process has maybe gotten a little bit better towards that. And you have a fresher ideas and fresher thoughts. You have worked with a lot of great musicians. You know a lot of great musicians. Who are from the past or right now musicians you would like to have or would like to work with? Maybe some of them you can't because they're no longer with us, but who would you have liked to have worked with or still would like to work with that are still with us today?
Well, I'd love to work with Rick Rubin. And one of the things that really I dig about Rick, now, I mean, look, that's the creme de la creme. And so, that may not become as a,
for those who don't know who Rick Rubin is, explained it.
So Rick came up with the Beastie Boys back in the 80s and has produced darn near everybody over the last 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of this cerebral approach where he doesn't try to put his stamp on what you're doing, which is what most producers do. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but Rick is really all about, I want to get the best you out of you.
Yeah.
And I want to put you in an environment where you feel comfortable and creative. And so for me, I would love to work with him for that reason. People I've worked with, who I would love to work with, leaving aside the Beatles, because that would be an interesting room to be sitting in.
It's too bad you didn't watch last week's show. My guest, Joe Johnson, who's an old friend of mine, he has literally interviewed Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr and people like that. Hold on, my phone is ringing and it's going to stop ringing now.
All right.
There you go. People, I get those robocalls. He has interviewed Ringo Starr. He's interviewed Paul McCartney. He has a show called Beatle Brunch, and he knows everything there is about the Beatles. As a matter of fact, they're doing a rock and roll cruise next year, the Flower Power cruise. Who else besides, the Beatles? Well, you could work with McCartney if you really could, nuzzle up to his farm and go, "Hey, Mr. McCartney, I'm here," right? But
I can give it a shot.
Yeah.
So there's a band that I love that I don't think I sound anything like, but it's been one of my favorites. A band called Neutral Milk Hotel. They're an indie rock band that had an album that came out in the late 90s and then got rediscovered about 20 years later. I would love to work with those guys.
Yeah.
I'd love to work with the guys live.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to work with the String Cheese Incident because I just love how they put together parts. There's really no shortage. There's a bunch of people I'd love to be creative with. David Byrne would be wonderful to work with. And I've met him a few times and he couldn't be nicer.
That's another thing too. How are musicians who have made it? Okay, like the people at the Talking Heads, you met them, you're friends with them. How are they? Are they approachable? Are a lot of the young? I mean, back in the day, and I toured with Engelbert and Tom Jones. I know you're going, who are those two people? But
Tom Jones, are you kidding me? Sex Bomb.
Yeah, Sex Bomb USA. They're not approachable all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends.
They give you that. Oh, who are you? Get away from me. Kind of.
I think it depends. I think most of the time it depends. So a guy like David Byrne, can't ride his bicycle through New York City at some days without getting stopped. And so I would imagine as that happens more and more, it becomes, you just want to get through the room as it were. But I found people that I've approached, because I've opened for a whole bunch of great bands, and most of them have been really friendly. But the key is that there's sort of you really don't want to ask them for anything. I think that there's this, people want to gush over people who are famous. They want to, oh my goodness, they're on so many things. And if you just take a step back and approach them as a real person, you'll probably have a little bit more success. And so
I think a lot of
them really friendly.
I think a lot of people don't know what to do or say to a celebrity. I think when they see a celebrity in a restaurant, they don't understand, okay, I'm so-and-so, but I'm here with my wife or my date or friends, and I'm not on stage anymore, and they want to take an autograph. And when you don't give them the autograph or you don't take the picture with them, they're like, well, who does Mr. So-and-so think he is, Mr. High and Mighty. But the truth is it's like that. And we sense it too. When I was hanging out at the Improv in LA, I'd see Jay, and I've known Jay since I was 8 or 9 years old. Some nights he wanted to be left alone, or he was talking with other comics. One of my dear friends who lives in Fort Lauderdale, Will Schreiner, we played on the same softball team in LA over there at Fairfax High School. People don't always want to be bothered. I have lunch with a good friend of mine here every once in a while. People have come up to me. Now we're going back how many years for Hill Street Blues? How many years? Will come up to me. I saw you on Hill Street Blues. I go, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Do you think that has a lot to do with it? That people, they don't know what to say. And even if they're big fans, and I've seen people meet their heroes and we become blithering idiots. Like when you had your child that was born, or you get a new kitten, you don't know what to do. You act like a child yourself, and this is what I've done, or this is what I've done, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Alan has seen it all, that's why I think sometimes people get a little too hyper about meeting celebrities. Who are the people from the past now, besides the Beatles, that you would love to work with?
Oh, again, the guys from Neutral Milk Hotel, I would love to work with REM. Yeah. I would love to work with Johnny Marr from the Smiths, because he's probably my favorite guitar player. Mm-hmm. I love what Jeff Tweedy does with Wilco. He's definitely a different vibe than I create. But boy, he has got one of the best live bands out there right now. And I'd love to work with guys like that.
I hope, this is my hope, that Ken puts you together with Frankie and your band, and you come up with a huge album, because Frankie's, he's so creative, and I don't know why he hasn't brought you two together.
That's a good question. I'd love to meet Frankie. Frankie's just a monster talent.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming on the show eventually, one of these days. I'm not really sure when. What has Alan Chapell learned about Alan Chapell through all of these years and I want to get back into Bombay too. We're going to be running a little over, folks, at 5 o'clock. Gary Allen with you, along with Alan Chapell. You're listening to Main Street right here at 4 p.m. every Friday afternoon. We're going to talk about Bombay here in just a minute again. But what has Alan Chapell learned about Alan Chapell all these years in every aspect of your life?
Well, I think that what I've learned is to trust my own sense of what I want to do. Every time I run into, another musician who says, no, it can't be done that way, or it won't work at that tempo, or, you really, at the end of the day, you have to trust your own gut. And that was hard for me, even 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so that's one of the things that's been a growth area for me, is to really learn that, and to find the right balance, because sometimes you get feedback and advice and it's good. And so you have to really be able to know which pieces to take and under what context. And so for me, that's been, I think the number one lesson that I have had to continually relearn in life.
Do you look back on your growth and you think, wow, from where I came and where I am, wow.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever thought I'd have the life that I do, and I'm really happy with it. And we're gonna be back out on the road, hopefully in 6 months to a year, and continuing to play in front of some great audiences. But regardless, I'm gonna keep making music. I'm gonna make more of it, and hopefully it gets heard by more and more people. But the thing that I'm really happy with is that I think I've learned to make music that I'm really proud of. And that I think speaks of who I am.
When you went to Bombay, because of good old Kurt Cobain, what did you take from that time? For people who are unfamiliar with India and Bombay, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but what did you take from that you still incorporate in your music? Does it have a flavor? Does it have a layer in there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think some of the percussive nature and the danceability of a lot of popular music from India, I think I try to incorporate. And I work with a guy named Bashiri Johnson, who's worked with everybody, who's a phenomenal percussionist. And he kind of brings in a little bit more of that of world music type flavors. But I think the thing that I took away from India was just, I spent a lot of time learning to meditate and really learning to do nothing. And that might have been the most helpful thing of all. My time there was just learning to be okay doing nothing, because I tend to be a bit of a type A, and I'm frenetic, and I've got all this energy and all this. But the most important things that have ever happened in my life have been a result of my not being afraid to do nothing and to have goodness come in.
You and George Harrison.
Yeah.
You and George Harrison. I mean, I can't think of anybody who, and they all did. The Fab Four, they all went down there. Talk about that. I mean, that is fascinating, because I hear that from a lot of people, whatever business they're in, Alan, whatever business they're in, they always say, take time for yourself to gather yourself, whether it be through meditation or whatever relaxes you and allows your mind to close everything off and just be as one, as it were. Talk about that. Is that it's not easy to do, because we're so hurried around as a society, going here, going there, going there. It's not easy to just shut down for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or whatever you need, depending upon who you are. How refreshing is that for you when you finally come out of it and go, okay?
Well, it's terrifying. It's scary. But if you can come out, it's almost like sitting in an ice cold bath. If you're able to withstand the part of your body that says, "Oh my God, I'm going to die,"
Yeah,
and you can work through that, you can actually get to a state of Zen. And it's sort of similar with the idea of doing nothing. Once you accept that it's okay for you to do nothing for a bit, and you're the part of your brain that's freaking out, if you can get that part to be quiet, that's when the really cool ideas come in.
Yeah.
So the best things I've ever written have been because I haven't been afraid to be quiet for a bit.
And that's hard for people.
Yeah.
That's very hard for people, even if they're a very quiet person. It's very difficult. Now, you said earlier that you have the possibilities of 2 more albums coming out. Talk about those, and when do you anticipate them probably coming out so we can look forward to that?
Well, I've got the album Two Fishes, which will be out in a month or two. And meanwhile, we haven't set dates yet, but I think we're going to go in and start recording the basic tracks for, I guess, what will be albums 7 and 8 in April. And I'm super excited about these. These albums are, one of them is mostly a collection of 12 stories about people. I tried to write from the perspective of 12 different people that I met, either friends I've met along the way or people that I may have just met in an airport bar once. And I'll try to tell what I think is a component of their story rather than telling my story. And I'm really excited about that, because I think it allowed me to get out of my head a little bit and maybe share a slightly different perspective. But I think those albums, if I had to guess, those albums will be out late this year. Right. Maybe one will be out late this year. The other will be out early next year. And
they can find it on your website at Chapell. Thisischappell.com.
Thisischappell.com. It's also on all the streaming services like Spotify and let's not forget radio. I mean, we're played by a couple hundred radio stations regularly, and I'm grateful for that support, because that's really grassroots, man.
Yeah, and they keep saying radio is dead, and I don't know. I just hope, once this, here's before I get to the last question, where do you think that the habits will happen because of COVID. We talked about it earlier. Do you think people are going to be rushing to get back out there into the world? Like some people say, we're going to become like the gay 90s back, back in turn of the century. Or do you think people are going to do it in moderation and go, all right, some parts of my life have changed because of COVID and I've picked up other habits and I don't need to go back there. But where do you think it's going to be in the music industry? I mean, is it going to be gangbusters? Places are going to open up and boom, suddenly it's back to normal? Or do you think that's going to be a gradual step?
I think it's going to be a gradual step. I think there are some venues that, because they were really strategic in how they approached this, like I think of City Winery comes to mind, where I think that Michael Dorf is a super bright guy. He's a great guy as well, and is a huge music fan, but he's smart. And so I can see places like that opening, and heck, they are currently open, and they're making accommodations where everybody who comes in gets a COVID test on their way in, and that's not a perfect way, but it certainly reduces the risk. And so I can see places like that doing okay. I think we're another year or two away from the giant stadium festivals with 60,000 people in the audience. I think we might be a ways away from that.
Yeah, I think like the flu, I think COVID is kind of here to stay. It just will come and go as the seasons change. I mean, I'm not a doctor. You're not either. So it's kind of hard to predict. My final question to you, and I kind of asked it in another way before, but who is Alan Chapell?
You know, I think that's a question that is evolving over time. I'm somebody who, one part of my brain has a ton of passion for writing music and creating things alone and with groups of people, and loves to entertain and just loves to hold court in a room, and also loves to, be in front of a 10,000 person crowd. But I also have a lot of passion on the business side for building, helping to build companies and to provide advice, and it's slightly different sides of my brain, but boy, I love doing both of them. And one thing I'm really feel fortunate about is that I've been able to embrace both of those things. Yeah,
I mean, you are definitely an A-type personality. We talked before the show and some of the great things you got going, and I'll have to have you back on. I just hope I'm going to talk to Ken. I'm going to get you together with Frankie, because I think what a collaboration that could be,
Yeah, Frankie's a monster talent. I'd love to work with Frankie.
Frank, by the way, for those of you that don't know who we're talking about, Frankie Bavetta is won an Academy Award for his music for Dirty Dancing. I've had a time of my life, and is it Hungry Eyes? I always forget that other song that he wrote, but nevertheless, he's a giant. I had him on my show, my late night show once, and he was on for about a half hour, and then he had to go. But at any particular rate, Alan Chapell, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're about to go to a wine tasting. I hope this is, you'll be able to drink a lot of wine today. And I wish nothing for you and your family but happiness and God's grace. And I thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Main Street. Stay right there, Alan. Don't go anywhere. I want to thank all of you out there so much. We ran a little over at 5 o'clock, but thank you so much for joining us every Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. Next week, I have Richard Skipper, a Broadway performer, and he is one of the most talented guys on Broadway, and he's also an impersonator, so I think it's going to be interesting to have him on. But join us every Friday at 4 p.m. right here for Main Street. Gary Allen with you. Until then, please take care of yourselves and each other.